All right, everybody, how you doing? We're going to talk about a very unusual jazz venue in the Village. Opened in 1958, right in the middle of the hard bop era. A lot of great jazz albums, great musicians. New York is just swinging, baby, or bopping. Yeah, Mr. DeLaGoff opened this thing in 1958 and was housed in a very large building that was like Chicago-style architecture, large building. And originally the Village Gate was a jazz club in the basement and ground floor. However, there was a large room upstairs that was a theater, and it was called Top of the Gate, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The Village Gate, was actually where the jazz was happening for most of these years. And since it opened in '58 and jazz was hot, that's what you got. And everyone from John Coltrane to Dizzy Gillespie to Duke Ellington, Coleman Hawkins, Nina Simone, all the great luminaries of the day, Dexter Gordon, they all came through there, as late as Wynton Marsalis, as a matter of fact, all played in this venue. You see, the club ran from 1958 to about 1994. Now, they always had this kind of counterculture thing going on, where in the top floor where they had this theater, they did satire, they did musicals, they did off-Broadway things that were usually left of center, and some of these things were quite successsul, and some of them actually made it over to Broadway as well. But this type of activity brought in counterculture luminaries such as Allen Ginsberg and Timothy Leary, and musicians such as Jimi Hendrix, and musicians of that stripe. So it was never really a pure jazz venue, although jazz was the main course. I might mention to you that a young singer from Detroit, a church girl, made her New York debut at the Village Gate. Her name, you might know something about her. Her name was Aretha Franklin. Yeah, her first gig in New York was at the Gate. So they always had this kind of an open door policy where they would also program rock and folk and R&B and other musics as well as jazz. But jazz was what was happening. In the 70s, as the Latin music started to emerge as very, very popular, Symphony Sid was broadcasting a Monday night program from the Village Gate that featured Latin American music or Afro-Cuban music and Caribbean music. And so you started to have some of those acts performing at the Village Gate as well. And perhaps in the middle of the 70s, there were actually some experiments where they would bring in jazz luminaries to perform with these Latin jazz groups. Dizzy Gillespie is performing maybe with Tito Puente, and Dexter Gordon with Machito, and that kind of thing. And then a lot of the Latin jazz orchestras would bring in guest artists, such as a Wynton Marsalis, to come in and be featured. So they would have this blending of what we would call traditional American jazz, African American jazz, with the Latin-infused jazz of the Caribbean. And this was quite a successful experiment, and continued right into the 90s, when the club finally closed. There were also political functions there and benefits and that kind of thing. One of the most celebrated ones was in 1970 when there was a benefit held for Timothy Leary, and they actually hired Jimi Hendrix to be the feature artist for that benefit. So the Village Vanguard, because it was in such a large building, could do a multiplicity of things. And although in the basement and the main floor, jazz was king, and for a while they infused the Latin American music with traditional jazz players as featured artists, jazz still was king. However, in the upper room, which was called Top of the Gate, that's where you had the musicals and counterculture type performances and poetry and plays and rock concerts and that kind of thing. And so although it was a very eclectic blend of musical offerings, it was very successful from 1958 until 1994 in a very large building on the corner of Thompson and Bleecher in the Village. I understand that now what was the Jazz Club is now a CVS. So how should I say? You can still get your healing on the corner of Bleecher and Thompson in the Village. You just can't get a musical healing. You can get a medicinal healing now, all right? So that's the story of the Village Gate. I most certainly hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.